Let's start solving Test 1, Section 1 of Reading Academic from Cambridge Book 19. The heading of the passage is How Tennis Rackets Have Changed. We have a total of 13 questions of two types. One, true false not given, and the second, complete the information. Let's start with true false not given. What we know about true false not given is that the answers are in the same order as the information in the text. So we'll read one question at a time, understand it, figure out its answer, and then move on to the next one. Let's start with the first one. The first thing we do is see if we can get a tentative idea of where the answer may be located in the passage. The first question and even the second question have the name Andy Murray, and we can see 2016 mentioned in the first question. So we look at the passage. In the passage, we see Andy Murray mentioned in the first paragraph. It is also mentioned in the second paragraph. But we see 2016 at the very beginning of the passage. So we are expecting the answer to the first question somewhere in the first paragraph. Now we read the question carefully and understand it. People had expected Andy Murray to become the world's top tennis player for at least 5 years before 2016. People had expected means people thought or believed that something would happen for at least 5 years before 2016 means for 5 years or more. That is, from 2011 or before 2011, people thought that Murray would become a top tennis player. So, did people think that? If yes, the answer would be true. If no, the answer would be false. And if we can't say for sure with the information given in the passage, we'll write it as not given. Let's look at the first paragraph now. We can see the mention of 5 years, which is mentioned in the question also, in the last sentence of the first paragraph. So, first we focus on this sentence, try to understand it. Yet, 5 years previously, he had been regarded as a talented outsider who entered but never won the major tournaments. Had been regarded as means people thought of him as this. Talented outsider. Talented is someone who's very skilled. So people thought that Andy Murray was a good tennis player, but he was an outsider. An outsider in this context means he was not part of the main group or the main competition. He was not part of the top players. He entered the tournaments, he participated in them, but he never won them. So, from this, we feel that people did not think he would become a top tennis player. The tricky thing here, however, is from this sentence, we cannot be sure if 5 year previously refers to 5 years before 2016, and we cannot be sure if he here means Andy Murray. If we look at the complete paragraph, we can see that before this sentence, a few more players are also mentioned. So let's understand what is written before this. In 2016, Andy Murray was ranked as world's number one. It was an incredible achievement by any standard. So, no matter how we look at it, it was a big achievement that he was number one. Made even more remarkable by the fact that he did this during a period considered to be one of the strongest in the sports history, competing against all of these big tennis players. So, what we get from here is that it was a big achievement that he became number one player in 2016. No other year is mentioned till here, which means 5 years previously is referring to 5 years before 2016. Also, this he refers to Murray. If it had referred to these players, this would have been they. So he has to refer to Andy Murray. So, did people think Murray would become number one player 5 years before 2016? No, people did not think that, because 5 years previously, people thought that he did not win any major tournaments. The answer to this one, therefore, is false. Did people expect him to become a top player 5 years before 2016? No, people did not expect that he would become a top player. These are some synonyms that helped us figure out where the answer was. People had expected from here is he had been regarded as. So this is in active voice, whereas this part is in passive voice. So he had been regarded as a talented outsider by the people. Before 2016, 5 years previously. And this is where the answer became false. Question says people expected him to become the top tennis player. Passage says people thought he never won any major tournaments. Moving on to the next question now. This question again mentions Andy Murray. The change that Andy Murray made to his rackets attracted a lot of attention. If we look at the passage, this is where we had found the answer to the first question. We are expecting the answer to the second question after this. We see Murray mentioned in the second paragraph and even in the third paragraph. We do, however, see mention of some change, etc., in the second paragraph. Let's now understand the question properly. What this means is that he had made some change to his rackets and it attracted a lot of attention. That is, people noticed the change that he made. So there are actually three different parts to this question. Did he make any change to his rackets? Did people notice the change? And did a lot of people notice the change? Because attracted a lot of attention means a lot of people noticed this change. For the answer to be true, all three have to be true. If even one of them is false, the answer would be false. If even one of them is not given, the answer would be not given. Let's look at the passage now. In the passage, this is from where we have mention of a change being made to the rackets. We'll focus on this part first. We will, however, discuss a little bit about what is mentioned here later. Basically, this paragraph talks about two different changes that Murray made. Till here, one change is mentioned. From here, the second change is mentioned, which is change made to his rackets. So let's focus on this part. Another change was so subtle as to pass more or less unnoticed. Subtle is something which is not obvious or not easy to notice. More or less unnoticed is that it was unnoticed by almost everyone, which means almost no one noticed it. And then we have a mention here that he switched to or he changed to a synthetic string. In the tennis racket, we have strings. He changed the string that he was using. This was a small change, but its importance should not be underestimated. That is, that this change should not be thought of as unimportant or less important. The main answer, however, comes from this part. So subtle as to pass more or less unnoticed. So coming back to our understanding of the question, did Murray change something about his rackets? Yes, he did. Did people notice this change? Not really. It was almost unnoticed, and certainly a lot of people did not notice it. So the answer to this one is also false. In the question, we had change made to his rackets. The corresponding phrase in the passage is switched to a synthetic string. However, the part that does not match, that made the answer false, is in the question we had attracted a lot of attention. whereas the passage says, so subtle as to pass more or less unnoticed. However, the major thing that could confuse you about this question is that in the beginning of the same paragraph, the second paragraph, we have these words like visible, changes, widely publicized, which may make us think that there is a change which is widely publicized. There was a change which was widely publicized, but that was that Murray invited some player to his coaching team. It had a visible impact, that is, it had a clear effect on his game. But this is about a new member in his coaching team. The paragraph begins with, of the changes that account for this transformation. The transformation is the big change that is mentioned in the first paragraph. That is, he became world's number one player, even when 5 years before people thought that he would not win any major tournaments. So, this was the major transformation. The reason for this transformation were two changes. One was that he invited a player. This was a visible change. This attracted a lot of attention. But our question is about a change to his rackets, which was something which was unnoticed. And after this, we have details of what that change was. So that is why the answer to this one is also false. Let's move on to the next question. Most of the world's top players take a professional racket stringer on tour with them. This is a phrase we can keep in mind. We also notice that the next question has two other names. So we'll keep these names in mind as well, because the answer to the third question should be before these names. So this is where we had found the answer to the second question. Mike and Bob Bryan, which are mentioned in the fourth question, are somewhere here. We are expecting the answer to the third question between this and this. And we also see the mention of professional racket stringer here. So, most probably the answer should be somewhere here. Let us first understand the question. Now, when I first read this question, I had no idea what a stringer is. I could guess, however, because a teacher is someone who teaches, and a racket has strings in it. So I assumed a professional racket stringer would be someone who puts strings on these rackets. So, what this question says is, when world's top tennis players go on tour, that is, when they go for tournaments, most of these tennis players take a professional stringer with them. So, the person who is responsible for putting strings on their rackets or correcting any fault with those strings, these players take that stringer along. So, what we are looking for is, do the tennis players take a professional stringer with them? But another important part here is the most part of the question. Most of the players means the majority of or more than half of the players. Some words that sometimes give us the answer to most in reading passages are typically, generally, commonly, and usually. So we'll keep them in mind, but let's see what the passage says. Now, this is a professional racket stringer who is saying this, what we see in quotation marks. Touring professionals have their rackets customized to their specific needs. So, the touring professionals here are the professional tennis players who are on tour. It is a highly important part of performance maximization. Maximization comes from the word maximum. To make something maximum or to make something the largest or highest amount possible. So, to make the performance the best possible, it is important to have rackets customized or made to order according to what a tennis player needs. Consequently, as a result of this, the specific rackets used by the world's elite are not actually readily available to public. So elite is a word we use for the most skilled people, for the best people in any field. Sometimes we also use this word for the very rich people. But here the elite refers to the elite tennis players, that is the top or the best tennis players. So the world's top players are the elite players. But what we see here is there is a mention of how important it is to have customized rackets. There is a mention that the rackets that these people use are not available to the public. What is not mentioned is whether they take a professional stringer along or not. So they use a professional stringer. Do they take the stringer along with them to tour? We don't know. And certainly we don't know about the answer to the most part then. Therefore, the answer to this question is not given. Moving on to the next question now. This question mentions Mike and Bob Bryan. These two are mentioned only in the third paragraph. So this gives us the tentative location of the fourth question. Now let's understand the question. Mike and Bob Bryan use rackets that are light in comparison to the majority of rackets. Majority again means most of the rackets or more than half or the commonly used rackets. So the rackets that these two use are light in comparison. That is what we need to find out. Are they lighter or are they heavier? So this is the paragraph from the passage that we have. There are quite a few difficult words here, so I have listed out simple meanings of those words. You can see them on screen. We actually get our answer from this sentence. The rackets they use now weigh more than the average model. The average model means the commonly used type of rackets. So it clearly says here that the weight is more, which means they are actually heavy in comparison, which means the answer to this one is false. One reason for confusion in this question could be the mention of the word paint here. One could think that the light here is talking about whether the paint is light or dark. But where paint is mentioned, there is no mention of how dark or light the paint is. And it is clearly mentioned that the weight is more than the average racket. So the answer to this question is false. Let's start with the next question, the fifth question. The fifth question again has a name, Werner Fischer. So we'll look through the passage and see where this name is mentioned. This name is mentioned for the first time in the fifth paragraph. This is where we had found the answer to the previous question. So we can skip this paragraph. We don't need to read this as yet and start with the fifth paragraph. Let's understand the question now. Werner Fischer played with a spaghetti strung racket that he designed himself. The first thing to understand here, spaghetti is a kind of pasta, but that is certainly not what we are talking about here. Spaghetti strung racket refers to a type of racket, and I'm assuming it has got something to do with the strings of the racket. That is all I need to know, that it is the name of a type of racket. So what the question means is, Werner Fischer played with a racket which was called spaghetti strung racket, and he designed it himself. He designed the racket himself. If the answer to both of these questions is yes, the answer would be true. Let's read the passage now. There are a lot of big words in the passage, so I've listed out simple meanings of those words. But here I'll only focus on the parts which are relevant to the question that we are working on. Werner Fischer started playing with the so-called spaghetti strung racket. It created a string bed, so it here is the racket. And if we read after this, we have some information about the racket, even the fact that it was banned, but nowhere is it mentioned who designed the racket. So did Fischer play with the racket? Yes. Did he design the racket? We don't know. If we don't know the answer is not given. So the answer to our fifth question is not given. Let's move on to the next question now. The sixth question does not have any capitalized words. It does, however, have this word whether. And the next question has another name, Pete Sampras. So the answer to the sixth question is between these two, and we are hoping to find some mention of weather. It could be the word season, it could be the name of a season like summer, winter, etc. Keeping this in mind, let's look at the passage. Now, in the passage, this is where we had found the answer to the fifth question. Climatic conditions are mentioned in the next paragraph, in the sixth paragraph. Now we have a tentative location of the answer to the sixth question. So let's read the question. The weather can affect how professional players adjust the strings on their rackets. Once again, I do not understand the technicality of this. I do not know much about this sport. However, if I use my imagination a little, I do know that there are certain things which are affected by weather. Wood expands in monsoons. We experience it that the doors and the drawers become tight in monsoons. Even leather shoes feel different in wet weather. And the same for certain balls as well. They absorb moisture and it affects how the play works. This is something that is said about tennis balls and cricket balls. What the question is asking is, does the weather affect the strings of the racket? Simple meanings for a few words from the passage are on your screen. Let's try to understand the relevant parts. This sentence mentions climatic conditions, so this is the one we'll focus on. They'll continually change it depending on various factors, including court surface, climatic conditions, and game styles. Who are they and what are they changing? That is what we need to understand. So we read the sentence before this. The former is far more common than the latter. Now, these two words, former and latter, I would want to discuss a little in detail. When you talk about two things, the first thing can be referred to as former and the second thing as latter. So, if I say, I like apples and oranges, the former is my favorite, apples are my favorite. Similarly, if I say, I like tea and coffee, but I'll have the latter if you have both, I'm asking for coffee. These two words can be very useful in your writings. This is an example of how you can use it in your IELTS essays. Some people prefer online shopping because it is convenient, while others like shopping in stores for the experience. The former saves time, but the latter allows for better customer service. What this means is the former, that is online shopping, saves time. The latter, which is shopping in stores, allows better customer service. Going back to our reading passage now. Because this sentence mentions former and latter, we need to read the sentence before it to understand what these former and latter are. So, modifications, that is changes, can be divided into two groups, two categories, those to the string bed and those to the racket frame. So, the string bed would be this part and the racket frame would be the outside part. What they are saying is the kind of changes that are made to a racket can be divided into changes to the string bed and changes to the frame of the racket. The former, that is the string bed changes, are more common than the racket frame changes. This punctuation mark, colon, tells me that now there will be some more details of what is talked about till here in the sentence. The choice of the strings and the tension with which they are installed. The tension means how tight the strings are, is something that nearly all professional players experiment with or they try different things. What this means is that what kind of string is used and how tight the strings are, it varies from one professional player to another, and they try different types of strings and different tightness of the strings. They will continually change it. Now, in the previous sentence, they refers to the professional players and it refers to the tension, that is how tight the strings are. Players will continually change the tension or the tightness of the strings depending on various factors, and one of the factors is the climatic conditions, which is the weather. So, does the weather affect how professional players adjust the strings? Yes, it does. So, the answer to this one is true. Let's now start with the last true false not given question, the seventh question. This question has the name Pete Sampras. So the first thing we do is go to the passage and see where this name is mentioned. This is where we had found the answer to the sixth question. The name Pete Sampras is mentioned much later in the ninth paragraph. Once again, we can skip paragraphs. We don't need to read these at all. We straight away start with this paragraph for this question. Let's understand the question now. It was believed that the change Pete Sampras made to his rackets contributed to his strong serve. Serve means when a player hits the ball to start a point in tennis. A strong serve means a powerful serve. So, what this question is saying is that it was believed, that is, people believed that whatever change Pete Sampras made to his rackets helped him in having a strong serve. So that is what we are looking at. Did people believe this or not? This is what we have in the passage. Much of the serving power, so the serving power is the power of the serve or how strong the serve is, of Pete Sampras was attributed to, or it was believed that it was because of the addition of 4 or 5 lead weights onto the rackets. So Pete Sampras made some change to his rackets, that is, he added something to his rackets, and people believed or people attributed his serving power to this change. That means the answer to this one is true. With this, we are done with all the true false not given questions. Let's start with the next set of questions, the complete the information questions. One thing that is common between true false not given questions and complete the information questions is that the answers to this one also will be in the same order as the information in the text. So for this also, we'll follow the same technique. We'll first get the tentative location of the answer in the passage, then we'll understand the question thoroughly, then go to that part of the passage to look for the answer. In case of complete the information questions, you find the exact word or words that need to be inserted in the blanks. So what this means is you do not need to make any changes in the words you find in the passage. You'll find the exact word which is the answer. And the instruction about how many words are allowed is very important in this question type. All our answers will be one word only answers. It cannot be more than one word. Let's start with the first question now. It has the names Mike and Bob Bryan. These are two names we have already come across when we were doing true false not given. So we have seen where these names are mentioned. These names are mentioned in the third paragraph. Let's understand the question now. Mike and Bob Bryan made changes to the types of blank used on their racket frames. So Mike and Bob Bryan made changes to types of something. This something was used on racket frames. Let's go through the paragraph now. The meanings of quite a few words are on your screen. Let's focus on the relevant part. So this is what Mike and Bob Bryan are saying from here on. They are saying they are very particular with their racket specifications. That is, they are very careful about or very choosy about the details of their rackets. Then they mention that they send them to a manufacturer. Frames go through a thorough customization process. So the racket frames are customized. That is, changes are made to the rackets to suit the specific needs of the players. Then Mike and Bob Bryan explain how they have adjusted not only the racket length. So, what are the changes they have made? One change that is mentioned here is they have adjusted the racket length. This is one change. The second change that is mentioned is experimented with different kinds of paint. So, experimented means they have tried different kinds of paints, which means this is one of the changes that they have made to the racket frames. So, both these changes, the racket length and the different kinds of paints, both these changes refer to the changes done to the frames. Types of mentioned in the question corresponds with different kinds of paint that is mentioned in the passage. What could be problematic, however, is that where we find the answer, that sentence does not mention the word frames at all. The word frames is mentioned in the previous sentence, but the answer is not from that sentence. This sentence mentioned that frames are customized or changes are made to the frames according to the specific needs of the players. And in the next sentence, they mention two different kinds of changes they made to the frame of their racket. Moving on to the next question. The question does not have any capitalized words, but it does have spaghetti strung racket mentioned in it. This is something we've already come across in one of the true false not given questions. As we discussed then also, spaghetti is a kind of pasta, but this is not what this spaghetti here is about. This is about a type of racket. Spaghetti strung is a type of racket, something to do with the kind of strings, I assume. Let's understand the question now. Players were not allowed to use the spaghetti strung racket because of the amount of blank it created. So we know that players were not allowed to use this type of racket. What was the reason for that? The racket created a certain amount of something. So what is that something? This is the fifth paragraph in which spaghetti strung racket is mentioned. Simple meanings of some of the words in the paragraph are on your screen. We will focus only on the part that is relevant to our question. So here it is mentioned that a player named Fisher started playing with spaghetti strung racket. The racket created a string bed that generated so much topspin that it was quickly banned. String bed is the arrangement of strings on the racket. So all the strings together on the racket make the string bed. Banned means it was not allowed. Generated means created or produced. Let's look at this conjunction set, so much that. It means something is done to such a large degree that because of it something happens. So if I say he practiced so much that he became the best player on the team, what I'm saying is he practiced a lot and because of that he became the best player. So here what it means is that that is the spaghetti strung racket, created or produced a string bed that generated, that is, that created or that produced a lot of topspin, because of which the racket was quickly banned. So the racket was not allowed because of the amount of topspin it created. When I first attempted this, I had no idea about what topspin means. Even now, I know it very vaguely. I just Googled it a little. But what is important to be understood here is that not knowing the meaning of this word should not stop you from figuring out that this is the answer if you understand all the other words around it. Moving on to the next question now. This question again does not have any capitalized words. It has this one word diets, which I'll keep in mind because I'll be on a lookout for any reference to food. In the fifth paragraph, this is where we had found the answer to the ninth question. In the same paragraph, a little later, we see the word nutrition. We also see the word significance, which can correspond to the word important in the question. Now let's read the question carefully. Changes to rackets can be regarded as being as important as players' diets or the blank they do. Can be regarded as, can be considered as. So, whatever changes are made to the rackets, they are as important as or they are equally important as two things. One is the diet of the players, and the other is what? That is our answer. In the paragraph, we have today it is in many ways an aspect of the game. So, what is this it referring to? If we go back to the previous sentence, however, within a decade or two, racket modification became a regularity. Became a regularity means it became something which was regular or it's something which was common. Racket modification is changes in the racket. So, this sentence says today racket modification or changes to rackets is in many ways, which means it can be regarded as equal in significance or as important as. What are the two things? One is nutrition, the second is training. So, nutrition, we have the diets, training is our answer. These are the synonyms which helped us figure out the answer. Moving on to the next question now. Again, no capitalized words, but we have the word animals here. And maybe even natural strings can help, but animal is the main word that I'll keep in mind as I scan the passage for the location of the answer. Now, this is where I had found the answer to the 11th question. As I scan the passage, I see that sheep and cow are mentioned at the beginning of the 7th paragraph, and I also see the word natural here. So, I can skip this paragraph, I don't have to go through this at all. I start with the 7th paragraph. Let's understand the question now. All rackets used to have natural strings made from the blank of animals. So, used to have tells us it is something that happened in the past. All the rackets in the past had natural strings. These natural strings were made from something of animals. What was that something? In the passage we have at one time, this means in the past, all tennis rackets were strung with natural gut made from the outer layer of sheep and cow intestines. Sheep or cow intestines means intestines of sheep or cow. So the answer is intestines. Another possible answer to this question is gut. Now, gut is a material made for animal intestines, but it is also another word for intestines. So, both of these are correct answers. You can use either of them. Now, one source of confusion when looking for this answer could be that this is where we had found the answer, but the next paragraph mentions natural string. The question mentions natural strings. It is also mentioned at the end of the previous paragraph. Actually, where we find the answer, it says tennis rackets were strung with, which means the strings of tennis rackets were made with. But we do not have the phrase natural strings anywhere where we find the answer. However, read the sentences where natural strings are mentioned. This one mentions a hybrid setup in which both synthetic and natural strings are used. There is no mention of how the natural strings are made. Hybrid means a combination of one or more things. This is a word we come across a lot when we are talking about work, like hybrid mode of work. Sometimes you go to office, sometimes we work from home. Hybrid mode of education, sometimes you go to attend classes, sometimes you attend online classes. Here we are talking about hybrid approach to having the strings in the rackets where both synthetic and natural strings are used. If we look at the mention of natural string here, it says studies indicate that the average spin from copolyester string is 25% greater than natural string, and then something else about copolyester strings is mentioned. Again, no mention of how natural string is made. It's just a comparison between two types of strings, copolyester and natural string. So even if you're confused, you would need to go back to check what natural strings are made of. So these two have no mention of how natural strings are made. That is why the answer cannot be here. Moving on to the next question. The 12th question has a name. It has capitalized words, Pete Sampras. These will help us locate the answer in the passage. And we have actually already come across this name when we were doing true false not given. This is where we had found the answer to the 11th question. Once again, we skip a paragraph because the name Pete Sampras is mentioned for the first time in the 9th paragraph. Let's understand the question now. Pete Sampras had metal something put into the frames of his rackets. So Pete Sampras had something put in the frames of his rackets. This thing was made of metal. What was this something? This is where the answer is coming from. Much of the serving power of US professional player Pete Sampras was attributed to the addition of 4 or 5 lead weights onto his rackets. To figure out the answer to this question, it is very important that you understand that lead is a metal. So lead weight means metal weights. Another thing that could confuse you is that this sentence does not mention the frames of his rackets. It does not mention what part of his rackets. The sentence before this mentions that many players go beyond, that is, they do more than this. So they do more than just and make changes to the racket frame. So what this sentence tells us is that some players are not choosing just to change things about the strings, they're changing things about the frame of the racket also. And this example is something being done to the frame of the racket. So that is how we know that this change is being done to the frame of the racket. Interestingly, the answer to the 7th question, the true false not given I mentioned before, was also from the same sentence. Let's move on to the next question now. The 13th question again has a name that is mentioned. So the first thing we do is locate the name in the passage. This is where the answer to the previous question was. Towards the end of the next paragraph, this is mentioned. So now we have the tentative location of the answer. Let's go back to the question and read it carefully. Goncalo Oliveira changed the blank on his racket handles. So this person changed something in his racket handles. What was it? Here we have Oliveira replaced the original grips of his rackets with something thinner because they had previously felt uncomfortable to hold. So this player replaced or changed the original grips on his racket handles. But in the instructions of these questions, it was clearly written that all our answers need to be one word only. So we cannot write original grips, the answer would be just grips. Another possible confusion could come from the fact that the word handles is not mentioned in this sentence where the name of this player is mentioned. The sentence does mention uncomfortable to hold. This could tell us that we are talking about the handle or the grips. And if we go through the sentences before this, we see that whole of this paragraph is about changes being made to the handle of the racket. So all of the changes that are mentioned are to do with the handle. So the answer to this one is grips. With this, we are done with all the questions of section 1. Let's now try to understand some of the strategies we used when we tried to figure out these answers. So the first very important thing, certain question types in IELTS reading has answers in the same order as the information in the text. In this passage, we have two question types, true, false, not given, and complete the information or fill in the blanks. In both the cases, the answers are in the same order as the information in the text. That is, wherever we find the first answer, the second will be after that, the third will be after that, and so on. We make good use of this information. We read one question at a time, look for its answer, and then move on to the next one. When looking for each of the answers, we followed a system. First, we identified some location keywords from the question. The easiest location keywords are capitalized words. Name of people or places, etc., can help us locate the position of the answer in the passage easily. Besides this, numbers can also help us locate info. And sometimes words like spaghetti or words like animals can help us locate the information. So the first thing we do is see if there is any location keyword in the question. Also, sometimes you may not be able to find an answer. What you do in that case is, like for example, if you find the answer to the second one, but you are not able to locate the answer to the third one, you move on to the fourth one, find its answer. The answer to the third one will be between the second and the fourth answer. These may seem like very little things, but they really help us manage time well and find answers quickly. So we try to find the tentative location of the answer in the passage. We come back to the question, we read and understand the question very carefully. This is something we did for every single question. Keep in mind that the language of the question is usually easier than the language of the passage. So it's easier for you to understand the question and then find corresponding words in the passage. And if you're able to locate the answer carefully, it actually means that many times you do not need to read every single paragraph of the passage. On your screen, you can see the location of the different answers in the passage. This is where we had found the answer to the first one, then second, then third, and so on. This is where the next question type, that is fill in the blanks or complete the information, had started. So eighth was here, ninth after it, and so on. One very interesting thing to note here is that sometimes there are whole paragraphs that you may not even need to read. That helps you save time. Obviously, that is only possible if you are able to locate the answer in the correct place. And also, just looking up exact words and trying to find the same word in the passage does not help. You have to understand the meaning to be able to locate the answer. This question is a very good example of this. Natural strings are mentioned in the question. This is where we had found the answer to the 11th question. This sentence mentions rackets were strung with natural gut. So the word natural is there, but natural strings are not mentioned. Natural strings are mentioned later in the passage. So rather than just trying to find the exact words, focus on understanding the question before you start looking for the answer in the passage. That's it for now. I have explained each question in a simple way to help you understand it better. I've also tried to cover any points that might confuse you when finding the answer. If there's still something that you didn't understand, feel free to leave a comment. I'll make sure to improve in future videos. It takes hours to make just one video. So please support us by liking and sharing this one, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Bye for now. All the very best.